I'm Sarah. I'm 26 years old, and last night my Aunt Martha called me a worthless charity case in front of 30 people while wearing a diamond necklace I secretly paid for. The dining room was beautiful, but the air felt cold. The long mahogany table was polished so bright I could see my own tired reflection in the wood. Crystal glasses sparkled under the heavy gold chandelier, and the smell of expensive roast beef filled the air. My aunt sat at the head of the table, draped in dark blue silk that rustled every time she moved. She looked like a queen, but her eyes were as hard as flint. She tapped her glass with a silver spoon, the ringing sound cutting through the polite chatter of our wealthy relatives. Everyone went silent. She looked directly at me, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I want to make a toast," Martha said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "To my niece, Sarah. It's so brave of her to show up tonight in that simple dress. Most people in her position, living on our handouts, would be too ashamed to eat at a table this fine. But Sarah knows that as long as I am in this house, I will always provide for my favorite charity case." The room stayed quiet. A few people chuckled awkwardly, looking down at their plates. I could feel the heat of their pity, but I didn't blush. I didn't scream. I didn't even drop my fork. I simply took a slow sip of my water, feeling the cool liquid hit my throat. I looked at Martha, really looked at her, and felt a strange sense of calm. I reached into my small, worn purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. It wasn't fancy. It didn't have gold leaf or a wax seal. I slid it across the polished wood toward her. It made a soft scratching sound in the silence. "What is this?" Martha sneered, not touching it. "Is this a thank you note? Or a request for more rent money you can't afford?" "It's a gift, Auntie," I said softly. My voice was steady like a deep river. "Something to help you sleep better at night." She laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "I sleep just fine in my mansion, Sarah. Maybe you should worry about your own tiny apartment." I didn't answer. I just watched her eyes. Before I tell you what was in that envelope and how it turned Martha's world upside down, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, let's go back to where it all began. 10 years ago, I didn't have an envelope. I didn't have a secret career or a bank account. I only had a small suitcase and a heart that was breaking in two. My parents had passed away in a car accident, leaving me with nothing but memories and a sudden, terrifying silence. Aunt Martha had appeared at the funeral like a savior. She was my mother's older sister, always more fashionable, always louder, always acting like she was the main character in a movie. She hugged me in front of the cameras and told the reporters that she would take me in. She told the world that family takes care of family. But the moment the front door of her large house closed behind us, the hug ended. "The attic room is yours," she had said, pointing a manicured finger toward the narrow stairs. "Don't get the carpets dirty. This isn't a playground, Sarah. It's a privilege. You are a guest here, and guests must be useful." I remember walking up those stairs. The wood creaked under my feet. The attic was dusty and smelled like old paper and forgotten things. There was a small window that looked out over the backyard, where Martha's daughter Chloe had a massive swing set and a playhouse that was nicer than my new bedroom. I spent my teenage years in the shadows of that house. While Chloe went to private schools and had horseback riding lessons, I was given a list of chores. I wasn't allowed to eat dinner with them most nights. "It's better for your studies if you eat in the kitchen," Martha would say, her voice calm but firm. She made sure I knew the cost of everything. Every bowl of cereal, every school notebook, and every pair of shoes was a gift from her. She kept a mental ledger of my debt, and she made sure to remind me of it whenever I looked too happy. "You're so lucky I have a big heart, Sarah," she would say while I folded her laundry. "Without me, you'd be on the street. You have to work twice as hard just to show you're worth the space you take up." I learned to be quiet. I learned to be invisible. But more importantly, I learned to listen. I listened to her husband, Uncle Robert, arguing on the phone about bad investments. I listened to the way Martha bragged to her friends about their debt-free life, while I saw the yellow past due notices hidden in the kitchen junk drawer. I realized early on that the luxury Martha lived in was like a house made of cards. One strong wind, and it would all come tumbling down. In that dusty attic, with a laptop I bought with money from cleaning neighbors' yards, I started to build my own world. While Martha thought I was doing homework or staring at the wall, I was learning. I was coding. I was building things that the world would eventually want to buy. I let her call me a charity case for years. I let her make me the help. I did it because I knew that as long as she thought I was nothing, she would never see me coming. By the time I graduated college, which I paid for with a secret scholarship Martha didn't know about, I was already making more money in a month than Robert made in a year. But I stayed in my tiny apartment. I wore my simple dresses. I let her keep her pride, mostly because I wanted to see how far she would go. Last night, at that dinner, she finally went too far. She didn't just insult me. She tried to strip away the last bit of dignity I had in front of the entire family. She thought she was the one holding the power because she owned the house. She didn't know that the bank had been ready to take that house away 6 months ago. She didn't know that Uncle Robert had cried in a dark office when he realized they were going to lose everything. And she certainly didn't know who had stepped in to save them. Martha finally reached for the envelope on the table. Her fingers, tipped with bright red polish, trembled just a little bit. She looked at me one last time, her lip curling in a sneer. "Whatever this is, Sarah, it won't be enough to buy your way into this family's respect." She ripped the top of the envelope open. As she pulled out the single sheet of paper, the color began to drain from her face. Her confident posture slumped. The queen was starting to shake. What did Martha see on that paper that made her drop her wine glass, shattering it against the floor? The sound of the wine glass shattering against the hardwood floor was the only thing that broke the suffocating silence of the dining room. Red wine splattered across the hem of Aunt Martha's expensive silk dress, looking like a dark, spreading wound. Usually, Martha would have screamed. She would have scolded the nearest person for being clumsy, or made a scene about the cost of the rug, but she didn't say a word. Her eyes were glued to the document I had placed in that plain white envelope. Her face, usually flushed with the pride of a woman who owned the world, turned a ghostly shade of gray. Her hand, still holding the paper, began to shake so violently that the page rattled. "Martha?" Uncle Robert asked, his voice cracking. He leaned over, trying to see what had turned his wife into a statue. "Martha, what is it? Is it a joke?" I sat there perfectly still. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply watched her. To the rest of the family at the table, I looked like the same charity case I had been for a decade. Quiet, unassuming, and small. They didn't see the fire behind my eyes. They didn't see the years of calculated patience finally reaching its boiling point. To understand why that paper made her heart stop, you have to understand the house we were sitting in. Martha called it the manor. It was a sprawling estate with 5 bedrooms, a library no one read in, and a garden that cost more to maintain than most people made in a year. To the outside world, it was a symbol of the family's old money and untouchable status. But to me, it was a prison, where the bars were made of beautiful things. I remember my first night in that house. After my parents died, I was 16. Most girls that age are worried about exams, or who they're going to the dance with. I was worried about where I was going to put my shoes so I wouldn't get yelled at. Martha had walked me through the halls, her heels clicking like a ticking clock on the marble floors. "Everything here has a place, Sarah," she had told me, her voice cold and hollow. "This house is perfect. My life is perfect. You are a chaotic element. If you want to stay, you will learn to be as silent and as clean as the furniture." She had relegated me to the attic, a space that was stiflingly hot in the summer and freezing in the winter. While my cousin Chloe slept on Egyptian cotton sheets downstairs, I slept on a thin mattress that smelled of mothballs. Martha didn't give me an allowance. Instead, she gave me a debt book. Every time she bought me a school uniform, she wrote it down. Every time I ate a meal that wasn't just leftovers, she wrote it down. "I'm teaching you the value of $1, she would say with a thin, cruel smile. "Since you have no parents to provide for you, you must understand that nothing in this world is free. You owe me, Sarah. Never forget that." I never did. As I sat at that dinner table years later, watching her crumble, I thought about the thousands of hours I spent in that attic. I thought about the nights I spent working on my old, battered laptop until my eyes burned. I started by doing simple data entry for companies halfway across the world. Then, I taught myself how to code. I learned how markets worked. I learned how to find value where others saw nothing. By the time I was 20, I was making a quiet fortune. I didn't buy fancy cars or designer bags. I didn't want Martha to see my success. I wanted her to see my failure. The more she looked down on me, the more invisible I became. And the more invisible I was, the more I could see the truth about her perfect life. One night, 3 years ago, I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water. It was late, and the house was dark. I heard muffled sobbing coming from Robert's office. I stood in the shadows, my heart thumping against my ribs. "We're going to lose it, Martha," Robert had whispered. "The investments are gone. The bank is calling. We haven't paid the mortgage in 4 months." "You will fix it," Martha hissed back, her voice sharp with desperation. "I will not be the woman who lost the family estate. I will not have people looking at me with pity. Do you hear me? We will find the money, sell the stocks, take out a private loan. I don't care. No one can ever know." From that night on, the dynamic changed, not in her eyes, but in mine. Martha became louder. She became meaner. She started hosting more parties, buying more jewelry, and throwing more insults at me. It was all a mask. The more she felt herself slipping into poverty, the more she needed to feel superior to someone. And I was her favorite target. She would stand in the middle of the foyer, surrounded by vases of fresh lilies, and lecture me on how people like me would never understand the burden of maintaining such a legacy. She would call me a drain on her resources, while she was secretly drowning in debt. What she didn't know was that I had been watching the for sale lists. I had been watching the legal notices. When the bank finally moved to foreclose on the house quietly, they didn't list it under Martha's name. They listed it under the holding company Robert had used to hide the debt. I didn't hesitate. I didn't do it out of love. I did it because this house was the only thing my mother had left of her childhood home before Martha manipulated the inheritance. I bought the mortgage through a shell company called SJ Holdings. For the last 6 months, Martha hadn't been paying the bank. She had been paying me every time she sneered at me for being a charity case. I was the one who ensured the lights stayed on. Every time she told me I was lucky to have a roof over my head, I was the one who actually owned that roof. Back at the dinner table, the silence was finally broken by a low, guttural sound from Martha. She looked up from the paper, her eyes bloodshot and wide with a mixture of terror and fury. "How?" she breathed. The word was barely a whisper. "How did you get this?" "This is a bank document. This says the mortgage was bought out. It says the new owner is..." She stopped, her gaze falling on me. The realization was hitting her like a physical blow. The poor orphan she had used as a footstool for a decade was no longer sitting at her feet. "The new owner is me, Auntie," I said, my voice as calm as a still lake. "And I think it's time we talked about your behavior in my house." The entire table gasped. Chloe, who had been busy checking her phone, dropped it into her plate of pasta. Robert looked like he was about to have a heart attack, but Martha just stared at me, her mouth working but no sound coming out. I stood up slowly, smoothing out the fabric of my simple dress. I looked around the room at the people who had spent the last hour laughing at my expense. "I have been very patient," I continued, my voice gaining a cold, sharp edge. "I have listened to every insult. I have folded your laundry. I have eaten your leftovers. But the charity ends tonight." I leaned in closer to Martha, so close I could smell her expensive perfume, the perfume I had technically paid for. "The paper in your hand is a notice of default," I whispered. "You haven't paid the last 2 months of rent to the holding company. In 30 days, this house goes on the market. Unless..." Martha finally found her voice, though it was high-pitched and hysterical. "You can't do this. I am your family. I took you in." "What took in a servant, Martha?" I corrected her. "And now, the servant is the landlord." I turned to leave the room, but I stopped at the door. I looked back at the wreckage of the dinner, the spilled wine, the stunned faces, and the woman who was slowly realizing her reign was over. "Oh, and Martha?" I added. "I'm moving my things out of the attic tonight. I think I'll be taking the master bedroom starting tomorrow. It has much better light for my work." As I walked toward the stairs, I heard Martha let out a scream of pure rage. But as I climbed the steps to my dusty little room one last time, I heard something else. I heard Uncle Robert's voice, trembling and small, asking a question that made me stop in my tracks. "Martha, did you tell her about the other thing, the thing in your sister's will?" I froze. My mother's will? I was told there was no will. I was told everything went to Martha because my parents died without a plan. What was the other thing Martha had been hiding for 10 years? I stood perfectly still on the dark wooden stairs, my hand gripping the banister. The wood felt cold and smooth under my palm. Below me, in the dining room, the air was thick with the smell of spilled wine and the sudden, sharp scent of fear. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a bird trapped in a cage, but I kept my breathing slow. I had spent 10 years learning how to hide my emotions in this house. I wasn't going to stop now. "The will, Martha." Robert's voice came again, shaking. "You said you burned it. You said if Sarah ever found out about the trust fund, she'd leave us with nothing. Well, look at us now. She already owns the house and we have nothing anyway." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty hallway. A trust fund? My mother had left a will? For a decade, Martha had told me that my parents died in debt. She told me that their small house had been sold to pay for their funeral. She told me that every piece of bread I ate was a gift from her own pocket. It was the foundation of her power over me. She had built a throne out of lies, and I had been the one polished it for her. I didn't go back downstairs. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to move like a ghost, just as I had been doing for years. I retreated quietly to my attic room and closed the door. The attic was small, with slanted ceilings that made me feel like the house was leaning in on me. But this room was also my sanctuary. In the corner sat my desk, 2 plastic crates with a piece of plywood on top. On it sat my laptop, a sleek, powerful machine that cost more than Martha's jewelry. It was my window to the world. I sat down and opened the screen. The blue light washed over my face, calming me. To the world, I was Sarah, the quiet girl who did chores. But online, I was SJ, a ghost investor and a lead developer for high-end security software. I remembered the beginning. I was 17, sitting in this exact spot, shivering under a thin blanket. I had found an old textbook on computer science in a box of junk Martha wanted me to throw away. While Chloe was out at parties, I was teaching myself languages like Python and C++. I realized that the internet didn't care if I was an orphan. It didn't care if my clothes were secondhand. It only cared if my code worked. My first big check had been for $500. I remember staring at the digital balance in my secret bank account, tears blurring my vision. It was the first thing I had ever owned that Martha couldn't touch. I didn't spend a cent of it. I tucked it away. Then came the ghost investor phase. I didn't just want to earn money. I wanted to build a fortress. I started looking into the very companies Martha and Robert bragged about owning stock in. I saw their mistakes before they did. I saw Robert's sure thing investments crumbling because he was too arrogant to read the fine print. While they were buying designer shoes to impress neighbors they didn't even like, I was buying up the debt they were drowning in. It started small, buying a few of their credit card debts through a third-party agency. Then, I moved on to their car loans. The mortgage was the final piece of the puzzle. When the bank sent the final foreclosure notice 6 months ago, I didn't feel happy. I felt a heavy, cold sense of duty. This house had belonged to my grandparents. My mother grew up in these halls. I couldn't let Martha's greed destroy the only physical history I had left. So, I created SJ Holdings. I hired a lawyer to speak for me, a man who never asked why a young woman wanted to buy a failing estate in secret. He just saw the wire transfers and did his job. Now, as I sat in the dark attic, I looked at the folder on my desktop labeled The Estate. I had been so proud of myself for outsmarting them. I thought I had won the game, but Robert's words downstairs changed everything. If there was a will, and if there was a trust fund, then Martha wasn't just a mean aunt, she was a thief. She hadn't just taken my dignity, she had stolen my future. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keys. I wasn't looking at stock prices anymore. I was looking for a ghost. I began searching through the public records of my parents' deaths again. I looked for the name of the lawyer who handled their small estate. I found a name, Arthur Vance. He was retired now, living in a small town 3 hours away. I leaned back, the silence of the attic feeling heavier than ever. Martha had spent 10 years calling me a charity case. She had used my own money that should have been mine, to buy the very silk dresses she wore while she insulted me. She had used my inheritance to pay for Chloe's horses and Robert's bad bets. She wasn't just my aunt, she was a parasite. I looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Downstairs I could hear the muffled sounds of an argument. Martha was screaming now, her voice thin and desperate. Then, I heard the heavy thud of a suitcase being thrown onto the floor. I realized she was going to try to hide the evidence. If there was a paper trail of that will, she would try to destroy it before I could take control of the house legally. I stood up and grabbed a small flashlight. I knew this house better than anyone. I knew which floorboards creaked and which doors stayed silent. Martha kept all her important papers in a safe in the library, a room she only used to look rich, never to read. I slipped out of my room, moving like a shadow. The hallway was dark. I reached the top of the grand staircase and looked down. The dining room was empty now, the broken glass still sparkling on the floor like tiny, sharp diamonds. I made my way to the library. The door was heavy oak, but I knew the trick to opening it without a sound. I slipped inside. The smell of old leather and dust greeted me. I walked over to the large mahogany desk. Behind a painting of a hunting dog was a safe. I had watched Robert open it 100 times from the doorway, while I was supposed to be dusting. Left 24, right 10, left 36. The lock clicked. The sound felt as loud as a gunshot in the quiet room. I held my breath, listening for footsteps. Nothing. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside were stacks of papers, deeds, insurance policies, and jewelry boxes. I began to dig. My heart was racing. Near the bottom, tucked inside a plain manila folder, I found it. It wasn't a fancy document. It was a simple piece of paper, with my mother's elegant, loopy handwriting. The last will and testament of Elena Wright. I opened it, my hands shaking. My eyes scanned the lines. To my daughter, Sarah, I leave the sum of... I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. The number was huge. It wasn't just a small savings account. It was a life insurance policy and a family trust that Martha had been managing as my guardian. But as I turned the page, a small handwritten note fell out. It was dated just 2 days after my parents' funeral. It was a letter from Martha to a lawyer, but it wasn't Arthur Vance. It was a letter asking how to redirect funds if the beneficiary was unstable. Martha had told the state I was mentally unfit to handle the money when I was 16. She had used my grief against me to lock me out of my own life. Suddenly, the library light snapped on. I spun around, the documents clutched to my chest. Standing in the doorway was Martha. She wasn't wearing her silk dress anymore. She was in a bathrobe, her hair messy, her face twisted with a look of pure, murderous hatred. In her hand, she wasn't holding a wine glass. She was holding a heavy silver candle snuffer gripped like a club. You always were a sneaky little rat, Sarah, she spat, stepping into the room. You think owning the house makes you the boss? You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine? This was never yours, Martha, I said, my voice low and dangerous. This was my mother's. And you stole it. Martha stepped closer, her eyes darting to the papers in my hand. Give me those papers, Sarah. Give them to me right now, or I'll tell the police you broke into my safe. I'll tell them you finally lost your mind, just like I told the judge 10 years ago. I looked at the woman I had called Aunt for a decade. I realized then that there was no calm way to end this. She was a cornered animal, and she was ready to bite. But I had one more secret Martha didn't know about. A secret that was currently recording every word she said, from the small device hidden in my pocket. Are you sure you want to do that, Martha? I asked, taking a step toward her. Because I'm not the only one listening. Who else was on the other end of that recording, and what would they do when they heard Martha's confession? The library felt smaller with Martha standing in the doorway. The shadows cast by the tall bookshelves looked like long, dark fingers reaching out for us. Martha's chest heaved under her bathrobe. She looked nothing like the polished, perfect woman who had sat at the head of the table an hour ago. She looked desperate. She looked like a woman who had built her life on a foundation of sand, and the tide was finally coming in. Who is listening, Sarah? Martha hissed, her eyes darting around the dark corners of the room as if a ghost might step out. You're bluffing. You've always been a quiet, pathetic little mouse. You don't have the spine for this. I didn't flinch. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my phone. The screen was dark, but a tiny green light was glowing at the top. I don't need a spine when I have the truth, Auntie, I said. My voice was as smooth as silk. I've been recording this entire conversation. Everything you said about the will, everything you said about lying to the judge 10 years ago, it's all being uploaded to a secure server as we speak. Martha's face went from pale to a sickly shade of purple. She lunged forward, reaching for the phone, but I stepped back easily. I spent years dodging her moods and her flying insults. Dodging her physical reach was easy. You think a recording will save you, she screamed, her voice cracking. I am Martha Wright. People respect me. You are nothing but a charity case. No one will believe a girl who has lived in an attic for 10 years over me. They won't have to choose who to believe, I replied, tucking the phone back into my pocket. The bank records will speak for themselves. The mortgage payments coming from my company will speak for themselves. And soon, the police will be asking why my mother's trust fund was drained to pay for Chloe's horses. At the mention of Chloe, Martha stopped. Her anger seemed to deflate for a second, replaced by a cold, calculating look. She cared about her reputation more than anything, but she cared about her daughter's lifestyle because it was a reflection of her own success. How did you do it? She whispered, her voice trembling. How did a girl like you get that kind of money? You were supposed to be struggling. You were supposed to be failing. I walked over to the library window. Outside, the rain had started to fall, a soft pitter-patter against the glass. The garden was dark, the expensive statues looking like tombstones in the night. I did it because you gave me no choice, I said, looking at my reflection in the window. When you took me in, you didn't see a niece. You saw a servant. You saw someone you could use to feel better about yourself. So, I learned to live a double life. While you were out at country clubs, I was working. While you were sleeping, I was studying. I became a ghost investor because it was the only way to be free from you. I turned back to her. 3 years ago, I realized Robert was losing everything. I saw the bank notices. I could have let you lose the house. I could have watched the moving trucks come and take your furniture, but I didn't. Do you know why? Martha stared at me, her mouth hanging open. I did it because I wanted to see how long you would keep up the act, I said. I wanted to see if there was even a tiny piece of a soul left in you. I wanted to see if, when things got hard, you would finally treat me like family instead of a burden. But you didn't. You got meaner. You used me as a target for your stress. You enjoyed hurting me because it was the only thing you felt you still had control over. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Talk, talk, talk. Every second was a second closer to Martha's world ending. What do you want? Martha asked. She sounded defeated now. She sat down in the large leather chair behind the desk, the chair she had no right to sit in anymore. I want what's mine, I said. I want the full accounting of my mother's trust. I want the deed to this house transferred out of the holding company and into my personal name. And I want you and Robert to tell the family the truth. Martha let out a short, dry laugh. The truth? If I tell them the truth, we are ruined. We will have nothing. You already have nothing, Martha, I reminded her. You are living in a house you don't own, spending money you didn't earn. You've been living a lie for 10 years. I'm just the one who's stopping the clock. Suddenly, the library door pushed open. Uncle Robert stood there, looking older than I had ever seen him. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. He looked at Martha, then at me, and finally at the open safe. It's over, Martha, Robert said softly. I heard everything from the hallway. She's right. We can't keep doing this. Martha looked at her husband with pure betrayal. Robert, be quiet. We can fix this. We just need to... Fix what? Robert interrupted. The bank called me today, Martha. Not the one you think. A different bank. They're investigating the transfers from the trust fund. They found a red flag. They're coming here tomorrow morning. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't triggered a bank investigation yet. I was planning to do that next week. If the bank was already moving, it meant someone else had noticed the theft. Martha's eyes went wide. What? Tomorrow? They can't. We need more time. Who called you, Robert? I asked, stepping toward him. Which bank? Robert looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange kind of fear. It wasn't a bank clerk, Sarah. It was a man named Mr. Sterling. He said he was a friend of your father's. He said he's been watching the account for years, waiting for you to turn 26. Yesterday was my 26th birthday. The day Martha chose to humiliate me at dinner was the day the protection on my trust fund expired. A cold realization washed over me. I wasn't the only one who had been playing a long game. My father had known Martha couldn't be trusted. He had set a trap, and Martha had walked right into it. He's coming at 8 a.m., Robert whispered, and he said he's bringing the police. Martha collapsed into the chair, her head in her hands. The room felt cold. The revenge I had planned was moving faster than I expected, and it was becoming much more dangerous than a simple house takeover. I looked at the documents clutched in my hand. I had the house. I had the confession. But now, I had a new problem. If the police came and found the money gone, Robert and Martha would go to jail. Chloe would be left with nothing. I looked at Martha. Despite everything she had done, despite the attic and the charity case insults, a small part of me wondered if I was ready to see her in handcuffs. Sarah, Robert said, his voice trembling. There's one more thing Mr. Sterling said. He said there was a second envelope, one that only you can open. He said it's hidden in the one place Martha never allowed you to go. I frowned. There was only one place in this house I was strictly forbidden from entering. It wasn't the library or the master bedroom. It was the old garden shed at the very back of the property, the one Martha kept locked with a heavy iron chain. What was waiting for me in that shed, and why was Martha's face turning white with a new kind of terror? The rain was coming down harder now, turning the glass of the library windows into a blurred gray wall. Inside, the air felt thick and heavy, like the atmosphere before a massive thunderstorm. Martha sat slumped in a leather chair, her fingers digging into the armrests. She looked smaller, as if the weight of her secrets was physically crushing her. The shed, I whispered. The word felt strange in my mouth. You told me that shed was full of old chemicals and rusted tools. You told me it was dangerous to even go near it. Martha didn't look at me. She stared at a spot on the rug, her jaw tight. It's nothing, Sarah. Robert is confused. That man, Sterling, he's just trying to stir up trouble. Your father was always paranoid. He liked games. It doesn't sound like a game, Martha, I said, my voice low and steady. It sounds like a backup plan. I looked at Robert. He looked ashamed. He wouldn't meet my eyes either. This was the man who had sat silently for 10 years while his wife called me a parasite. He had eaten the food my inheritance bought while I ate the scraps. His silence had been just as loud as Martha's insults. Give me the key, Robert, I said. Sarah, please, Martha pleaded, finally looking up. Her eyes were rimmed with red. It's nearly 1 a.m. We are all tired. We can talk about this in the light of day. Let's just go to bed. I'll make sure everything is sorted out by breakfast. Sorted out? I let out a short, cold laugh. Like you sorted out my trust fund? No, we aren't waiting for breakfast. We aren't waiting for Mr. Sterling. I'm going to that shed now. I didn't wait for them to answer. I walked toward the library door. You can't go out there, Martha shouted, standing up. It's a storm. You'll catch your death. You're being hysterical, Sarah. This is exactly why I had to tell the judge you weren't fit to handle money. You're acting like a child. I stopped in the doorway and turned back. I felt a wave of calm wash over me. For years, her insults had felt like stones being thrown at me. They used to hurt. They used to make me want to cry and hide in my attic. But tonight, they felt like nothing. They were just words from a woman who had lost her sting. You've used that word a lot today, Martha, I said quietly. Hysterical, unstable, charity case. You've used insults like gifts to keep me in my place. But here's the truth. I am the most stable person in this room. I am the only one who isn't a thief. And as for charity, I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. I'm not the one living on someone else's dime anymore. You are. So keep your insults. Use them to keep yourself warm tonight. Because this house is going to feel very cold very soon. Robert reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a heavy brass key attached to a faded red ribbon. He walked toward me, his hand shaking as he held it out. Don't you dare, Robert, Martha hissed. Robert ignored her. Go, Sarah, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I should have given this to you on your 18th birthday. I was a coward. I took the key. The metal was cold and heavy in my palm. Yes, I said to him. You were. I walked out of the library and through the kitchen. I grabbed a yellow raincoat from the mudroom and a heavy industrial flashlight. I stepped out onto the back porch. The wind caught the door, slamming it behind me. The rain was freezing, stinging my face, but I didn't care. I felt more alive in this storm than I had in years of living in that quiet, suffocating house. I made my way down the stone path. The garden looked different at night. The hedges looked like giant monsters, and the flowers were beaten down by the rain. At the very edge of the property, where the trees grew thick and dark, stood the shed. It was a small wooden building, covered in ivy. The iron chain Martha had talked about was there, wrapped around the handles like a snake. I stepped up to the door, my boots sinking into the mud. I fit the brass key into the lock. It was rusty, and for a second I thought it wouldn't turn. I leaned my weight into it, gritting my teeth. Click, the lock fell open. I unwrapped the heavy chain, the metal clinking loudly. I pushed the door. It groaned on its hinges, resisting me, but eventually, it swung open into the darkness. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam of light cut through the gloom. Martha had lied. There were no rusted tools here. There were no chemicals. The shed was lined with cedar wood. It was clean, dry, and smelled like lavender. In the center of the room sat a single, beautiful wooden chest. It was made of dark cherry wood, polished so well that it glowed in the light of my flashlight. On top of the chest was a small silver frame. Inside was a photo of my mother and father. They were young, laughing, and holding a baby, me. They looked so happy. They looked like people who believed the world was a kind place. I walked over to the chest. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached out and touched the cool wood. There was no lock on this chest. It was waiting for me. I lifted the lid. Inside weren't stacks of cash or gold bars. Instead, there were dozens of notebooks. They were my mother's journals. And next to them was a large, leather-bound ledger. I picked up the ledger and opened it to the first page. It wasn't a bank book for the trust fund I already knew about. It was something else entirely. My father hadn't just left me money. He had been a partner in a company that Martha had always claimed went bankrupt. But according to these papers, the company hadn't failed. It had been sold for millions, and the money had been placed into an account that Martha couldn't see. But as I dug deeper into the chest, I found a small, velvet pouch. Inside was a key to a safe deposit box at a bank in the city. And tucked under the pouch was a letter addressed to me in my father's handwriting. I opened the letter, my eyes filling with tears. Sarah, if you are reading this, it means Martha has failed the test. I hoped she would love you as her own. I hoped she would be the sister your mother believed she was. But I knew Martha's heart was full of shadows. If she has treated you well, give her the envelope inside the ledger. If she has been the woman I feared she was, use the key in the pouch. It will give you the power to take back everything she stole, and more. I looked back at the ledger. I found the envelope my father mentioned. I opened it. Inside was a legal document that would have given Martha a massive inheritance, but only if I signed it. It was a reward for kindness clause. Martha had spent 10 years treating me like garbage, never knowing that a single act of genuine love toward me would have made her a millionaire legally. She had traded a fortune for the pleasure of insulting me. But then, I noticed something at the very bottom of the chest. A small, modern recording device. One that looked exactly like the one I had in my pocket. It was already on. A small red light was blinking. I picked it up and hit play. A voice filled the small shed. It wasn't my father's voice. It was Martha's voice recorded only 2 days ago. She wasn't talking to Robert. She was talking to someone else. I don't care what the girl suspects, Martha's voice said through the speakers. Once we have the signature, we'll move her to the facility. The doctor's already paid. Sarah won't be a problem anymore. She'll be taken care of for good. My blood turned to ice. Martha wasn't just planning to steal my money. She was planning to have me committed to a mental institution. I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam swinging toward the door of the shed. Standing there in the rain, drenched and holding a heavy garden spade, was Martha. Her eyes were wide and blank, reflecting the light like a cat's. You should have stayed in the attic, Sarah, she said, her voice eerily calm. You really should have stayed in your place. What was Martha planning to do now that I knew her darkest secret? And who was the doctor she had already paid? The rain pounded on the roof of the shed, sounding like 1,000 tiny drums. I stood in the center of the small room, the flashlight in my hand trembling just enough to make the shadows dance against the cedar walls. Martha stood in the doorway, the garden spade clutched in her hands. She looked like a ghost in the dark, her skin pale and her eyes hollow. Put the shovel down, Martha, I said. I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Inside, my heart was racing, but on the outside, I was as cold as the rain. You've already lost. Killing me won't fix the bank records. It won't stop Mr. Sterling from coming tomorrow. Martha took a step forward, her boots squelching in the mud at the entrance. I'm not going to kill you, Sarah, she whispered. The calm in her voice was scarier than her screaming. I'm just going to help you. You've had a breakdown. The stress of your parents' anniversary, the delusions about owning this house. It's all too much for a fragile girl like you. I looked at the recording device in my hand. The red light was still blinking. I have you on tape, Martha. I heard you talking about the doctor. I heard the plan to lock me away. Martha laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Who will believe a recording from a troubled girl who broke into a locked shed in the middle of a storm? I'll say you were hallucinating. I'll say you've been acting strange for weeks. Robert will back me up. He always does. She was right about one thing. Robert was a coward, but she was wrong about me. She still thought I was the 16-year-old girl who arrived on her doorstep with a broken heart. She didn't realize that the charity case she had created was now a woman with resources she couldn't even imagine. Robert isn't going to help you this time, I said. He's in the library right now, realizing that his wife is a criminal. He's looking at the same documents I found. He's seeing the theft. Martha flinched. For a second, her grip on the spade loosened. I took that moment to move. I didn't run for the door. She was blocking it. Instead, I stepped deeper into the shed, putting the heavy cherry wood chest between us. You think you're so smart, Martha spat, her face twisting with rage again. You think because you made some money on a computer that you're better than me? I gave you a home. I gave you a name. Without me, you'd be nothing. You didn't give me a home, I countered. You gave me a room in the attic and a list of chores. You stole my mother's money to pay for a life you couldn't afford. You used me as a shield against your own failures. And now, the shield is gone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. I didn't just record you, Martha. I sent a message to my lawyer 10 minutes ago. If I don't check in with him every 30 minutes, he calls the authorities. He has the GPS coordinates for the shed. He knows exactly where I am. This was a lie, but it was a good one. In the world of tech and security, we call this a dead man switch. Martha didn't know enough about technology to know if I was bluffing. She froze, her eyes darting to my phone. You're lying, she whispered. Try me, I said. Go ahead, swing that shovel. But know that the moment you do, you aren't just a thief anymore. You're a kidnapper. You're a murderer. And no amount of lying to a judge will save you then. The wind gusted, blowing a spray of freezing rain into the shed. Martha looked down at the spade in her hands, then back at me. I could see the gears turning in her head. She was a bully, and bullies are always the biggest cowards when they realize their target can hit back. Slowly, she let the spade fall. It hit the wooden floor with a heavy clunk. This isn't over, Sarah, she said, her voice trembling with hatred. You might own the house. You might have found your father's little toys, but I am still the head of this family. I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. The family already knows, I said. They saw you at dinner tonight. They saw the mask flip. You can't put it back on, Martha. It's broken. Martha turned and walked out into the rain without another word. I watched her figure disappear into the darkness toward the house. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there in the cedar-scented air, listening to the rain and the sound of my own breathing. I looked back down at the chest. My father had left me the power to destroy her, but he had also left me a choice. I could be like her, cruel, calculating, and cold. Or I could be something better. I picked up the ledger and the recording device. I tucked the silver frame of my parents into my raincoat. I didn't need the rest of the things in the chest yet. They were safe here. As I walked back to the house, the lights in the library were still on. I could see the silhouette of Robert sitting at the desk. He looked like a broken man. I felt a flicker of pity for him, but it died quickly. Pity was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I entered through the mudroom and went straight to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands finally starting to shake. The warmth of the mug felt incredible against my frozen fingers. I sat at the small kitchen table, the table where I had eaten so many lonely meals while the real family laughed in the dining room. Suddenly, the house phone rang. It was late, and a phone call at this hour was never good news. I didn't answer it. I listened as the answering machine in the hallway clicked on. Martha? It's Dr. Aris, a voice said. It was a man's voice, deep and professional, but there was a hint of greed in it. I received the second half of the payment. The transport team will be there at 6 a.m. Make sure the patient is sedated, or at least quiet. We don't want a scene in the driveway. See you soon. The machine beeped and went silent. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 2:30 a.m. Martha hadn't canceled the plan. Even after the confrontation in the shed, she was still going through with it. She was going to have me taken away before Mr. Sterling and the police could arrive at 8 o'clock a.m. She thought she had 4 hours to win. She thought I would go to sleep and wait for the morning. I stood up and poured my tea into the sink. I didn't have time to be tired. Martha had sent her first warning, but she didn't realize I had already intercepted it. I went to my attic room and grabbed my laptop. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't need clothes. I needed information. I began to search for the name Dr. Aris. I needed to know who this man was and what kind of facility he ran. As the search results began to pop up, my eyes widened. This wasn't a normal doctor, and it wasn't a normal hospital. Martha wasn't just trying to hide me. She was trying to make me disappear forever. What did I find on that screen that made me realize I couldn't stay in this house for even one more hour? The blue light of my laptop screen felt like a cold fire in the dark attic. I stared at the search results for Dr. Aris, and a chill settled into my bones that no blanket could ever warm. He didn't run a hospital. He ran a private wellness retreat, a fancy name for a place where wealthy families sent their difficult relatives to be forgotten. There were reviews from former employees talking about heavy sedation and restricted phone calls. Martha wasn't just trying to win a fight. She was trying to delete me. I checked the time. 3:15 a.m. I had less than 3 hours before the transport team arrived. I knew I should leave right then, slip out the back door and disappear into the night. But there was one thing I couldn't leave behind. On the mantel in the downstairs living room sat a small porcelain music box. It was the only thing of my mother's that Martha had allowed to stay in the main house, mostly because it was a rare antique that looked expensive on the shelf. My mother used to play it for me every night before I went to sleep. It was my most precious heirloom, the only piece of my childhood that felt real. I closed my laptop and tucked it into my backpack. I moved down the attic stairs, my bare feet silent on the wood. I reached the second floor landing and paused. I could hear Martha in her bedroom. She wasn't sleeping. She was pacing. The floorboards above the living room creaked under the weight of her restless, angry steps. I crept down to the first floor. The house felt different now. It didn't feel like a home or even a prison. It felt like a trap that was about to snap shut. I made my way to the living room, the moonlight spilling through the tall windows and casting long, ghostly shadows across the furniture. I saw the music box. It was a delicate thing, painted with tiny blue flowers and gold trim. I reached out to grab it, but just as my fingers touched the cool porcelain, the lights in the room flashed on. Looking for this, I spun around. Martha was standing by the light switch. She was still in her bathrobe, but she had a glass of scotch in her hand and a terrifyingly wide smile on her face. She looked like she had finally snapped. She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She didn't look tired anymore. She looked energized by her own cruelty. "I heard you sneaking around, Sarah," she said, her voice low and raspy. "I knew you'd come for this. You were always so sentimental, so weak." "I'm leaving, Martha," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm taking what's mine and I'm going. You can have these last few hours in your mansion. I hope they're worth it." Martha laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. She reached out and snatched the music box off the mantel before I could grab it. "You aren't going anywhere," she said. "The doctor said you're a danger to yourself. And look at you, wandering around in the dark, talking about owning houses that don't belong to you. It's a tragedy, really. Give it back, Martha," I said, my heart sinking. "That's my mother's." "Your mother is dead," Martha spat. "And this? This is just a piece of junk. Just like you." She held the music box out over the marble hearth of the fireplace. My breath hitched in my chest. "Martha, don't," I whispered. "That's the only thing I have left. Charity cases shouldn't own nice things, Sarah," she said. "They should be grateful for what they're given. And I'm giving you a fresh start. A quiet room where you can't hurt anyone ever again." She opened her hand. The music box fell. It seemed to happen in slow motion. The blue porcelain hit the white marble and shattered into 100 jagged pieces. The tiny metal comb that played the music snapped, letting out one last distorted, haunting note before falling silent. I stared at the ruins of my mother's heirloom. Something inside me broke along with it. The last thread of family loyalty, the last bit of hesitation I had about destroying Martha, it all turned to dust. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I looked up at Martha, and for the first time in 10 years, she was the one who looked afraid. "You shouldn't have done that," I said. My voice was so quiet, it was almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of a mountain. "What are you going to do?" Martha sneered, though her hand was shaking as she took a sip of her drink. "Call the police? Tell them I broke a toy? They'll be here soon anyway, and they'll be taking you away in a very different kind of car." "I'm not calling the police for a music box, Martha," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black remote, the one I had taken from the shed. "I'm calling them for the Second Trust." Martha's brow furrowed. "The Second Trust? What are you talking about?" "The ledger in the shed wasn't just a list of money," I explained, stepping over the shattered porcelain. "It was a log of every cent you stole. My father knew you were skimming from the main account, so he set up a secondary trap. Every time he took money from me, it triggered a digital footprint. I've had the data for years, but I needed a confession to make it stick." I held up my phone. The recording of her admitting she redirected the funds in the library was already playing silently on the screen. "And as for the doctor," I continued, "I called him, or rather, I had my lawyer call him. We offered him triple what you paid to tell us exactly what you asked him to do. He's a greedy man, Martha. He doesn't care about you. He cares about the highest bidder." Martha's face went white. The glass of scotch slipped from her hand, thudding onto the rug. You can't," she stammered. "The transport team is still coming at 6 a.m., I said, a cold smile finally touching my lips. "But they aren't coming for me." I told them there was a change in the patient's status. I told them the older woman in the house had suffered a complete mental break after her husband's crimes were revealed. I leaned in close to her, the smell of scotch and fear coming off her in waves. "I have the power of attorney now, Martha. I signed the papers electronically an hour ago, using the emergency clause in my father's will. In the eyes of the law, I am your guardian now." Martha backed away, her heels catching on the rug. She looked around the room, as if the walls were closing in on her. Robert, help me." Robert was gone. He had taken his car and disappeared into the night, leaving his wife to face the storm alone. "He's not coming, Martha," I said. "No one is coming to save you." Just then, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway echoed through the house. Bright headlights swept across the living room walls. It was 5:45 a.m. The wellness team was early. I looked at the shattered music box on the floor. I would find someone to fix it. I would glue the pieces back together one by one. But Martha, she was beyond repair. "There's the car," I said calmly. "Shall we go meet them?" Martha turned to run toward the back door, but she stopped when she saw the person standing in the hallway. Who had returned to the house at the last second? And whose side were they really on? The person standing in the hallway was not the police, and it wasn't Uncle Robert coming back to play the hero. It was Chloe. My cousin stood there in her pajamas, her blonde hair messy, staring at the shattered porcelain on the floor, and then at her mother's terrified face. "Mom?" Chloe's voice was small, stripped of the usual arrogance she used when she talked to me. "What's going on? Why is there a van in the driveway? And why did Dad just text me saying he's sorry and he's staying at a hotel?" Martha scrambled toward her daughter, her hands clawing at Chloe's arms. "Chloe, darling, Sarah has gone mad. She's trying to take the house. She's calling people to take me away. You have to help me." Chloe looked at me. For years, Chloe had followed her mother's lead. She had called me names, ignored me at the dinner table, and treated the house like her personal kingdom, while I was just the ghost in the attic. But as she looked at the broken music box, the one she knew I cherished, and then at the cold, steady way I was standing, something shifted in her eyes. "Sarah?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "Is it true? Did you buy the mortgage?" "I did," I said. "And I did it to keep your father from going to prison for bank fraud. But your mother didn't want to be saved. She wanted to keep playing her games." I stepped toward my backpack and pulled out a thick stack of papers. I had printed them in the library while Martha was pacing upstairs. This was the paper trail. This was the truth, written in black and white, that no amount of Martha screaming could erase. "Here, Chloe," I said, handing her the stack. "These are the bank statements from the last 10 years. Look at the names on the accounts. Look at where the money for your horses came from. It wasn't family savings. It was my mother's life insurance." Chloe took the papers. Her eyes scanned the lines. her face growing paler with every page she turned. Martha tried to snatch them away, but Chloe stepped back, her expression hardening. "You told me Dad was a genius at investing," Chloe whispered to her mother. "You told me Sarah was a burden, but this shows you were taking thousands of dollars every month from an account with her name on it." "I was managing it," Martha cried. "I was making sure she had a roof over her head. I was doing it for us, Chloe." "Or you?" "No," Chloe said, a tear finally rolling down her cheek. "You were doing it for the silk dresses. You were doing it so you didn't have to admit you were broke." The front doorbell rang. It was a loud, heavy sound that echoed through the hollow house. The wellness team had arrived. I walked past them both and opened the front door. Two men in dark blue scrubs stood there carrying a clipboard. Behind them, the rain was still falling, making the lights of their white van look blurry and distorted. "We're here for the intake," the taller man said. "Patient Martha Wright." Martha let out a sob and ran toward the back of the house, but there was nowhere left to go. The house she had turned into a fortress of lies was now her own prison. "Wait," I said to the men. I looked at Chloe. She was looking at the papers, then at her mother, who was now huddled in a corner of the dining room. Despite the coldness in my heart, I knew I couldn't be the one to sign the final paper to send her away. Not like this. I wanted revenge, but I didn't want to become the monster Martha was. I had shown her the truth. I had taken back my power. "There's been a misunderstanding," I told the men. "The family is handling the situation privately for now. I'll pay the cancellation fee. Please leave." The men looked at each other, shrugged, and walked back to their van. They didn't care who went where, as long as the checks cleared. I closed the door and turned back to the room. Martha was shaking, her face buried in her hands. Chloe was still standing in the hallway, looking like her entire world had just dissolved. "You're not sending her away?" Chloe asked, her voice hushed. "No," I said, "but I am moving out, and you both have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I'm putting the house on the market." Martha looked up, her eyes wide. "You can't sell the manor. It's the family legacy." "It was my mother's legacy," I said, "and you broke it the moment you stole from her child. I don't want to live in a house built on lies, and I don't want you living in it either." I picked up my backpack and the pieces of the music box, carefully wrapping them in a silk scarf I found on the coat rack, one of Martha's favorites. I felt no guilt. "Where are you going?" Chloe asked. "I have my own place," I said. "A place where no one calls me a charity case. A place I earned." As I walked out the front door, I didn't look back. I got into my car, the engine purring to life. I drove down the long winding driveway, leaving the manor behind in the rearview mirror. But as I reached the main road, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The house was just the beginning, Sarah. "Check the safe deposit box. There is a reason Martha was so afraid of you turning 26. And it wasn't just the money." I gripped the steering wheel. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I thought I had won. I thought the paper trail was finished. But as I looked at the key to the safe deposit box sitting in my cup holder, I realized I had only uncovered the first layer of the secret. What was waiting for me at the bank? And why did it make my father's ghost investor plans look like child's play? The bank didn't open until 9 in the morning. I spent the early hours sitting in a small, quiet coffee shop a few miles away from the manor. I watched the rain turn into a light mist as the world woke up. People walked by the window, rushing to their jobs, worried about their own lives. They saw a young woman in a yellow raincoat, sipping tea and looking at a laptop. They had no idea that I had just dismantled a decade of lies. I kept thinking about that text message. The house was just the beginning. Who sent it? It couldn't be Robert. He was too busy hiding. It couldn't be Martha. It had to be someone from the outside. Someone like Mr. Sterling. At exactly 9 o'clock, I stood in front of the heavy brass doors of the city's oldest bank. This wasn't a modern building with glass walls. It was a stone fortress with marble floors that echoed every step. I walked to the counter and showed the clerk my ID and the key from the shed. "Follow me, miss." "Right," the clerk said softly. We went down a flight of stairs into the vault. The air was cool and smelled like old paper and cold metal. He led me to a small private room and brought a long metal box. He set it on the table, bowed slightly, and left. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. I expected more money. I expected more ledgers. But when the lid opened, I saw something that made my heart stop. Inside the box were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to me. But they weren't from my father. They were from people all over the country. Business owners, scientists, and teachers. I opened the one on top. "Dear Sarah, your father's investment saved our family farm. We have been holding your share of the profits in a trust, waiting for the day you were ready." I opened another, and another. It wasn't just a trust fund. My father had spent his life quietly funding people who had big dreams but no money. He called it the Seed Project. And according to the final document at the bottom of the box, I wasn't just an heiress. I was the head of a massive network of businesses that Martha didn't even know existed. But there was something else. A small, legal folder labeled The Wright Family Council. Inside was a list of names. My aunts, my uncles, and my cousins from all over the country. These were the people Martha had been trying to impress for years. These were the people who thought Martha was the successful one. I realized then that my revenge couldn't just happen in the dark library of the manor. If I wanted Martha to truly understand what she had lost, I had to show her in front of the people she valued most. I picked up my phone and made a call to Mr. Sterling. "It's Sarah," I said. "I've seen the box. I want to call a family council. Tonight." "Are you sure, Sarah?" Mr. Sterling's voice was deep and steady. "Once you reveal the truth to the council, there is no going back. Martha will be cast out." "She cast herself out the moment she broke my mother's music box," I said. "Tell everyone to meet at the manor at 7. Tell them it's an emergency meeting regarding the estate." I spent the rest of the day preparing. I didn't go back to my tiny apartment. I went to a high-end department store. I didn't buy a simple dress this time. I bought a suit, sharp, charcoal gray, and perfectly tailored. I had my hair done in a sleek, professional style. I wanted them to see the woman I had become, not the girl they remembered. When I pulled up to the manor at 6:45 p.m., the driveway was full of expensive cars. My relatives were all there, confused and whispering. They were standing on the lawn and in the foyer, wondering why the charity case had summoned them. I walked through the front door. The house was silent. Martha was standing in the living room, wearing a black dress, as if she were at a funeral. She looked at me, and her eyes went wide. She didn't recognize the woman walking toward her. "What is this, Sarah?" Martha hissed, trying to keep her voice low. "Why are all these people here? You have no right to invite them." "Actually, Martha, I have every right," I said, my voice carrying across the room. I didn't go to the corner. I didn't wait to be told where to sit. I walked straight to the head of the dining room table, the place where Martha had sat just 24 hours ago to insult me. The family gathered around. My Uncle Thomas, a stern man who ran a shipping company, cleared his throat. "Sarah, what is this about? Martha says you've had some kind of episode." I looked at Thomas. I looked at all of them. "I'm glad you're all here. For 10 years you've been told a story about me. You've been told that I was a burden on this family. You've been told that my Aunt Martha was a saint for taking me in." I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the large screen Martha used for showing off her vacation photos. "Tonight, I'm going to tell you a different story," I said. "A story about where the money in this house really came came from. Martha stepped forward, her face turning a bright, angry red. Stop this! You're embarrassing yourself, Sarah. Get out of this house right now. I can't get out of my own house, Martha, I said calmly. I clicked a button, and the image of the mortgage deed appeared on the screen. And, as the owner of this estate, I'd like to show you all the results of the recent audit. The room went deathly quiet. I began to show the slides, the transfers from my mother's trust, the seed project documents, and finally, the recording of Martha's confession from the library. As Martha's voice filled the room, admitting to lying to the judge and stealing my future, my relatives began to pull away from her. Uncle Thomas looked disgusted. My cousins looked shocked. Martha looked like she was shrinking. She reached out for a chair to steady herself, but Chloe, who was standing nearby, didn't move to help her. Chloe just looked at the screen with a face full of shame. You've used our family name to hide your crimes, Martha, Uncle Thomas said, his voice booming. You've treated this girl like a servant while you lived on her mother's blood. I did it for the family, Martha wailed, her voice cracking. I did it to keep up appearances. There is no family left for you, Martha, I said. I stood up and looked around the room. I had done it. I had revealed the truth. But as the council began to argue about what to do with Martha, Mr. Sterling walked into the room. He didn't look at the relatives. He looked straight at me. Sarah, he said, there's one more person who needs to speak. Someone you haven't seen in a very long time. The doors to the kitchen opened, and a woman walked out. She was older, with gray hair and a kind face, wearing a simple nurse's uniform. I felt the air leave my lungs. I knew this woman. She was the one who had been with my parents the night of the accident. Nurse Miller? I whispered. What did she have to tell me about that night that would change everything I thought I knew about my parents' death? The room was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Nurse Miller stood there, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked at me with eyes that were full of a deep, old sadness. For 10 years, I believed my parents' death was just a tragic accident, a rainy road and a car that went too fast. But as Martha saw Nurse Miller, she didn't just look angry. She looked terrified. She looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. What is she doing here? Martha shrieked, her voice hitting a high, panicked note. This woman is a stranger. Sarah, this has gone too far. You're bringing in actors now? You're trying to stage a play? Uncle Thomas held up a hand. Quiet, Martha. Let the woman speak. Her voice was soft but very clear. I've lived with a heavy heart for a long time, Sarah. Your father, he knew things were going wrong before the accident. He knew his sister-in-law was looking for ways to take control of the seed project. He came to me a week before he passed. He gave me a sealed statement and asked me to hold it until you were 26. She reached into her bag and pulled out a yellowed envelope. He told me that if anything happened to him and your mother, I should watch you from afar. He didn't want Martha to know I was a witness to his final wishes. He was afraid that if I spoke too soon, Martha would find a way to make you disappear before you were old enough to fight back. The family council shifted uncomfortably. My relatives looked at Martha, who was now backed into a corner, her chest heaving. The accident wasn't an accident, was it? I asked. My voice felt like it was coming from a long way away. My heart felt cold, like a stone in my chest. It was an accident, Nurse Miller said quickly, but it was an accident caused by stress and sabotage. Your father's car had been tampered with. He knew it, but he didn't have proof. He was on his way to see a lawyer when the brakes failed. In his final moments in the hospital, he didn't talk about the money. He talked about you. He told me, tell Sarah to stay quiet. Tell her to be a ghost until she is a lion. I looked at Martha. You tampered with the car. No, Martha screamed. I would never. I loved my sister. You loved her money, I said. I felt a strange, numb sensation. You loved this house. You loved the silk and the crystal. And when you realized my father was going to move the money into a trust you couldn't touch, you got desperate. I didn't kill them. Martha wept, falling to her knees. I just wanted to talk to them. I followed them that night. I saw the car go off the road. I could have called for help sooner, but I waited. I just waited 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes so I could find the papers in the briefcase before the police arrived. A collective gasp went up from the family. Martha had just confessed to letting her own sister die for a briefcase full of documents. Even Uncle Thomas, who was usually so stoic, turned away in disgust. 5 minutes? I repeated. The weight of those 5 minutes felt like it was crushing me. My parents could have been saved. I could have grown up with a mother's hug and a father's advice. Instead, I got an attic and a debt book. The family council was no longer a meeting about an estate. It was a courtroom. We are calling the police, Uncle Thomas said, his voice like iron. Martha, you are a stain on this family. We will provide the records of the trust theft, and Nurse Miller will provide her statement. You will never spend another night in this house. Martha looked up, her makeup smeared with tears. She looked at Chloe. Chloe, please, tell them I'm a good mother. For the first time, I saw no anger in Chloe's face, only pity. You weren't a mother, Mom. You were a manager, and your business just went bankrupt. Chloe walked over to me. She didn't say anything, but she handed me a small velvet bag. I opened it. Inside were the blue porcelain pieces of my mother's music box. Chloe had spent the last hour picking up every single shard. I'm sorry, Sarah, Chloe whispered. I didn't know. I should have seen it, but I didn't want to see it. I took the bag. We all see it now, Chloe. Mr. Sterling stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. The police are outside, Sarah, and the lawyers for the seed project are ready to move the remaining assets into your personal account. Martha's reign is over, but there is one more thing you need to see. He pointed to the screen, which was still showing the audit slides. He clicked to the very last page, one I hadn't seen yet. Your father didn't just leave you money and a business, Mr. Sterling said. He left you a map. The screen changed to a satellite view of a piece of land I didn't recognize. It was far away, in the mountains. There was a small building there, modern and surrounded by trees. What is that? I asked. It's the heart of the seed project, Mr. Sterling explained. It's a school for children like you, orphans who have talent but no support. Your father started it in secret. He wanted you to be the one to open the doors. I looked at the image of the school. It was beautiful. It was the opposite of the manor. It wasn't built on lies or stolen money. It was built on hope. As the police entered the room to take Martha away, I didn't watch her. I didn't want to see her in handcuffs. I didn't need that image in my head. Instead, I looked at the broken pieces of the music box in my hand and then at the map on the screen. I had spent 10 years being a charity case. I had spent 3 years being a ghost investor. But as I watched the red and blue lights of the police cars flash against the library walls, I realized that my revenge wasn't finished. Because Martha had a partner. She had mentioned a doctor and a signature. And Mr. Sterling had mentioned that my father's brakes had been tampered with. Martha didn't have the mechanical skills to mess with the car. She was too afraid to get grease on her hands, who actually cut the brake lines 10 years ago. And why were they currently sitting in a car just outside the manor gate, watching the police take Martha away? The red and blue lights of the police cruisers danced across the expensive wallpaper of the foyer, making the house look like it was bleeding. I stood by the window, my fingers wrapped tightly around the velvet bag of porcelain shards. Martha was being let out, her head bowed, her silent sobs the only sound in the hallway. The family council was breaking up, relatives whispering in small groups, looking at me with a mix of awe and fear. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking past the police cars, toward the iron gates at the end of the long driveway. There, parked under the heavy shadow of an old oak tree, was a dark gray sedan. Its engine was idling, a thin plume of exhaust rising into the cold night air. The driver didn't have their lights on. They were just watching. Sarah? Uncle Thomas approached me, his voice unusually soft. The officers need a final signature on the statement regarding the trust funds. Are you all right? I'm fine, Uncle, I said, not turning away from the window. But tell me something. When the accident happened, who was the first person Martha called? Before she called the police. Before she called you. Thomas frowned, thinking back. It was a chaotic night, but I remember she mentioned Robert was already there. He had been working late at the office and happened to be driving the same route. He was the one who helped her search the car for the briefcase. My blood turned to ice. Robert. I looked back at the dark car at the gate. As if sensing my gaze, the car's headlights suddenly flickered on, blinding me for a second, before it sped away into the darkness. Uncle, I need to speak with Mr. Sterling alone, I said. Thomas nodded and gathered the rest of the family, ushering them toward the dining room. I turned to Mr. Sterling, who was standing by the library door, his face unreadable. You knew, didn't you? I asked. You knew it wasn't just Martha. Mr. Sterling sighed and stepped into the library, beckoning me to follow. He closed the heavy oak door, shutting out the noise of the police and the crying. I suspected. Martha has the greed, Sarah, but she doesn't have the stomach for real violence. She's a bird of prey that waits for others to do the killing. Robert was desperate. He had gambling debts even back then that your father refused to pay. I sat down in the leather chair. The room felt different now. It was mine, but it felt tainted. The brakes. Martha confessed to waiting 5 minutes before calling for help, but someone had to make sure the car went off the road in the first place. Robert was an amateur racer in his youth, Sterling said, leaning against the desk. He knew exactly how to make a car look like it failed naturally. He thought that by getting rid of your father, he could manage the estate through Martha and pay off his debts, but he didn't count on your father's secret accounts. And now he's running, I said. Let him run, Sterling replied. He thinks he's heading to a private airstrip. He thinks he has a suitcase full of cash he's been skimming for years. What he doesn't know is that the cash he took from the safe tonight, I replaced it. I looked at him, surprised. What? GPS trackers and play money, Sterling said with a small, dry smile. The police are already following him, but he isn't going to the airport. He's going to a very specific location. A location your father picked out years ago, just in case. Where? The old warehouse by the docks, the one where the seed project first started. I stood up. I didn't want the police to handle this alone. I didn't want Robert to just disappear into a prison cell. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to know that the charity case he had ignored for 10 years was the one who had finally caught him. I'm going there, I said. It's dangerous, Sarah, Sterling warned. I spent 10 years living with a woman who wanted to destroy me, I said, grabbing my keys. I think I can handle a coward in a warehouse. I drove through the city, the streets slick with rain. My mind was a whirlwind of memories. Robert, sitting at the head of the table, never looking me in the eye. Robert giving me the key to the shed with shaking hands. I realized now that his cowardice wasn't just fear of Martha. It was the weight of a murderer's guilt. The warehouse district was dark and silent. The smell of salt and old wood filled the air. I saw the dark gray sedan parked crookedly near the entrance of a rusted building. The door was hanging open. I stepped out of my car, moving slowly. I didn't turn on my flashlight. I didn't need it. The moon was bright enough to light the path. I entered the warehouse through a side door. Inside, the air was cold and whistled through the rafters. In the center of the floor, under a single hanging light bulb, stood Robert. He was frantically digging through a leather suitcase, throwing stacks of paper onto the floor. Where is it? He screamed, his voice echoing in a vast space. Where's the money? It's all fake. It's all paper. It's over, Robert, I said. He spun around, his face pale and sweating. He looked like a trapped animal. Sarah? How did you, Martha? That woman couldn't keep her mouth shut for 1 hour. Martha didn't tell me anything about you, I said, walking toward him. Your own fear did. You've been running for 10 years, Robert. Not from the law, but from the ghost of my father. Robert laughed, a high, shaky sound. Your father was a fool. He had millions, and he wanted to give it away to schools and farms. I saved this family. I kept us in that house. You kept yourself in a lie, I corrected. And you killed the only people who actually cared about you to do it. Robert reached into his coat pocket. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't stop. I kept walking. He pulled out a small silver tool, a heavy-duty wrench. It was stained with old grease. I did what I had to do, he hissed, and I'll do it again. You think you're so smart, Sarah? You're just a girl. You're nothing. I'm the person who owns your life, I said. Every cent you spent, every meal you ate, every breath you took in that house, it was mine. And tonight, I'm taking the rest. Suddenly, the warehouse was flooded with light. Police officers swarmed the entrances, their voices loud and commanding. Robert dropped the wrench, his knees giving out as he fell onto the pile of fake money. As they handcuffed him, he looked at me. For the first time in 10 years, he actually looked at me, and in his eyes, I didn't see a killer. I saw a man who had realized that he destroyed his soul for a pile of paper that didn't even exist. I walked out of the warehouse, the cool harbor breeze hitting my face. I felt lighter. The charity case was gone. The ghost investor was finished. But as I reached my car, I saw a woman standing by the driver's side door. It was Chloe. She was holding a thick manila envelope. You forgot something in the safe, Sarah, she said. Her voice was flat, her eyes red from crying. Something my mother didn't want you to find until after she was gone. Something about why they chose you. I took the envelope. My name was written on the front in Martha's elegant, cruel handwriting. What was the final secret Martha was hiding? And why did it change the way I looked at my own name? The parking lot by the harbor was lonely and quiet. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the dark water against the wooden piers. Chloe stood there, her shadow long and thin under the flickering orange streetlights. She looked like a different person than the girl who had spent years mocking me. The pride was gone. All that was left was a tired, broken girl who had realized her parents were monsters. What is this, Chloe? I asked, holding the heavy manila envelope. The paper felt thick and expensive. The kind Martha used for her perfect invitations. I found it in the back of the safe, Chloe whispered, hidden behind a false panel. My mom always told me that you were family by blood, but she never told me the whole truth. After I saw the police take her away, I went back to the library. I had to know. I had to know why she hated you so much. I opened the envelope. Inside was a birth certificate. It wasn't mine, at least not the one I was used to see. I looked at the names. My mother's name was there, but the father's name wasn't my father. It was a name I recognized from the seed project documents. I wasn't just my father's daughter. I was the daughter of the man who had started the entire project, the man my father had partnered with to change the world. My father had adopted me to protect me because my biological father had been targeted by the same people Martha and Robert were secretly working for. She didn't just steal your money, Sarah, Chloe said, her voice cracking. She was paid to keep you small. She was paid to make sure you never found out who you really were. That charity she always bragged about, it was a salary. She was being paid by a rival company to be your jailer. I leaned against my car, the world spinning for a moment. Every insult, every charity case comment, every night in the attic. It wasn't just about Martha's mean spirit. It was a job. She had been paid to break me, but she had failed. Instead of breaking me, she had forced me to become stronger. Instead of keeping me small, she had made me learn how to hide in the shadows until I was powerful enough to own the light. What are you going to do now? Chloe asked. You own the house, you own the accounts, you have everything. I looked at the birth certificates, then at Chloe. I thought about the terms of stay I had planned to give them. I had originally wanted to make them live in the attic. I wanted to give them a debt book and make them fold my laundry. I wanted them to feel exactly what I felt for 10 years. But as I looked at Chloe, I realized that doing that would make me just like Martha. It would mean the jailer had won because she would have turned me into herself. I'm not going to be like her, Chloe, I said. My voice was calm, a deep contrast to the storm of emotions inside me. I'm selling the manor. I've already contacted a realtor, but I'm not going to leave you on the street. Chloe looked up, surprised. You're not? No. I'm setting up a small trust for you. It's enough for a modest apartment and to finish your education. But there are terms. I pulled a notepad from my bag and wrote down 3 things. 1. You will never contact Martha or Robert again. They are no longer your family. 2. You will volunteer at the Seed Project School for 1 year. You need to see the world outside of silk dresses and crystal glasses. And 3. I paused, looking her in the eye. You will never use the word charity as an insult again to anyone. Chloe nodded, tears streaming down her face. I promise, Sarah. I promise. The movers will be at the house tomorrow at noon. I said, take what is yours. The things that were actually gifts, not the things bought with my mother's money. Leave the keys on the mahogany table. I got into my car and drove away. I didn't go back to the manor. I went to a hotel in the city, a place with a view of the skyline. I sat on the balcony and watched the sun start to peek over the horizon. The revenge was almost complete. Robert was in custody. Martha was in a cell, waiting for a trial that would expose her to the whole world. The family name she loved so much was now a synonym for greed and betrayal. But as I sat there, I realized there was one person left. The doctor from the phone call. Dr. Aris. He had taken money to help Martha kidnap me. He had been part of the plan to make me disappear. And if he had done it to me, how many other difficult relatives had he locked away for a price? I opened my laptop. It was time for the ghost investor to make one last move. I wasn't just going to shut down his wellness retreat. I was going to buy it. I began typing, my fingers moving with a cold, sharp purpose. I found the holding company that owned the retreat. It was struggling, just like the manor's mortgage had been. They were looking for an anonymous buyer to bail them out before a lawsuit hit. I hit the buy button. Let's see how you like the intake process, doctor, I whispered to the empty room. I had the house. I had the truth. And now, I had the keys to the very prison Martha had designed for me. But as I looked through the patient list of the heiress wellness retreat, I saw a name that made me drop my glass of water. It was a name that shouldn't have been there. It was a name that changed the history of my family once again. Who was patient 402? And why did their presence in that facility mean that my parents' story wasn't over yet? The screen of my laptop glowed in the dim hotel room. My eyes were locked on the name for patient 402, Elena Wright, my mother. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. I sat there for a long time, the only sound being the distant hum of the city below. For 10 years, I had visited a grave. I had cried over a headstone. I had let Martha tell me stories about how my mother would be so disappointed in my failures. But the screen didn't lie. Elena Wright had been checked into the Heiress Wellness Retreat 2 days after the accident. The paperwork was signed by Martha and Robert. They hadn't just let her die. They had hidden her. They had told the world she was gone so they could treat her life like a bank account. I didn't wait for the sun to finish rising. I called Mr. Sterling. Sarah, it's 5 in the morning, he said, his voice thick with sleep. She's alive, Sterling, I said. My voice was a jagged edge of ice and fire. My mother is at the Heiress Retreat. Martha didn't just steal the money. She stole her life. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, the sound of a chair scraping. I'm calling the police. Meet me there in 1 hour. I drove to the Heiress Wellness Retreat with a calm that felt like death. I wasn't the scared girl in the attic anymore. I was the owner of this facility. I was the one who held the keys. The retreat was a beautiful, sprawling building, hidden behind high stone walls and iron gates. It looked like a resort, but the cameras at every corner told a different story. I pulled up to the front where Mr. Sterling was already waiting with 2 police cars. Dr. Aris was waiting at the door. He was a tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit. He looked calm, but I could see the sweat on his upper lip. He didn't know yet that I had bought the death of his company. He thought he was still in control. Ms. Wright, he said, stepping forward with a fake smile. There has been a mistake. We don't have anyone by that name here. The records you saw must be old. I didn't say a word. I simply handed him a legal folder. I'm not here as a visitor, Dr. Aris. I'm here as the new chairwoman of the board. You work for me now. And as your employer, I'm ordering a full inspection of Wing C. The doctor's face went from pale to ghostly white. You can't just buy a hospital. I can, I said. And I did. Now, move aside, where the officers behind me will help you find the exit. We walked through the silent, carpeted halls. It smelled like lavender and bleach, a smell meant to hide the truth. We reached a heavy wooden door labeled room 402. My hand shook as I reached for the handle. I pushed the door open. The room was filled with light. A woman was sitting in a chair by the window looking out at the trees. Her hair was grayer than I remembered, and her face was lined with a decade of sorrow, but it was her, my mother. She turned around, her eyes widening as she saw me. For a second, she didn't move. Then, a small broken sob escaped her lips. Sarah? I'm here, Mom, I whispered. I ran to her, and for the first time in 10 years, the silence in my heart was filled. While the police led Dr. Aris away in handcuffs, I sat on the floor at my mother's feet. She told me the truth that was even darker than I imagined. Martha had kept her sedated for years. Every time my mother started to get better, Martha would visit and tell her that I was dead. She told her the accident had killed both me and my father. She broke my mother's spirit to keep her quiet. I thought I was alone. My mother cried, her hand stroking my hair. You're never going to be alone again, I said. The fall of Martha and Robert was no longer a private family matter. By noon, the news had hit the headlines. Socialite, Martha Wright, arrested for kidnapping and fraud. The family name she had protected with lies was being dragged through the mud on every television screen in the country. The public was outraged. The neighbors who had looked down on me at the dinner party were now deleting Martha's number. The clubs she belonged to revoked her membership. The golden queen of the county had become its most hated villain. I moved my mother into a beautiful suite at the city's best hotel while I prepared our new home, a quiet mansion far away from the shadows of the manor. I didn't want the manor anymore. I wanted it gone. 2 days later, I stood on the sidewalk across from the Red Manor. A massive for sale sign was staked into the lawn. Moving trucks were lined up, taking away the furniture, the silk drapes, and the mahogany tables. Martha was allowed one phone call from jail. She called me. Sarah, please, she begged. Her voice sounding old and thin. Don't sell the house. It's all I have left. I'll give you everything. I'll sign the papers. Just let me have the house when I get out. I looked at the house. It was just wood and stone. It wasn't a home. It was a monument to a decade of pain. The house is already sold, Martha, I said. I sold it to a developer. They're tearing it down tomorrow morning. They're going to build a park for the Seed Project kids. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, a scream of pure, helpless rage. Martha realized that the legacy she had killed for was being erased. You're a monster, Sarah, she shrieked. No, Martha, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'm just the one who finally balanced the books. I hung up. I watched the last truck pull away. I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The charity case had taken everything back, and then she had destroyed the prison she was kept in. But as I turned to walk to my car, I saw a man standing by the gate. He was wearing a dark suit and holding a briefcase. He didn't look like a lawyer or a policeman. He looked like the men from the Seed Project documents. Miss Wright, he asked. Now that the distractions are handled, we have work to do. Your father's enemies aren't gone just because your aunt is in jail. They've been waiting for you to reveal yourself. I looked at him. I wasn't afraid. I had faced Martha. I had faced the attic. I had faced the truth. Let them come, I said. I'd had 10 years of practice at being invisible. Now I'm ready to be seen. What was the final mission my father had prepared me for? And who was the person behind the rival company that had paid Martha to be my jailer? The morning air was crisp and clear as I stood on the balcony of my new home. This house didn't have a name like the manor. It didn't have marble statues or a library filled with books no one read. It was a house made of glass and warm wood, perched on a hill that looked out over the city. It was a place where my mother could sit in the sun and watch the birds battle up on her door. The man in the dark suit, whose name I now knew was Julian, stood behind me. He placed a final folder on the outdoor table. The rival company, Apex Holdings, has filed for bankruptcy, Sarah. Once the news broke that they were funding Dr. Aris and paying your aunt to suppress illegal air, their investors vanished overnight. The man behind it all, CEO Victor Thorne, is currently facing federal charges. I didn't feel a rush of excitement. I didn't jump for joy. I just felt a quiet sense of completion. I looked down at the folder. Inside were the deeds to the Seed Project schools, the bank statement showing my mother's restored fortune, and the legal documents confirming that Martha and Robert would be spending the next 20 years behind bars. What will you do now? Julian asked. You have the resources to do anything. You could disappear. You could be the ghost again. I turned around and looked at him. I thought about the girl in the attic. I thought about the way I used to count my pennies and hide my laptop under a loose floorboard. I thought about the way Martha's voice used to make me flinch. The ghost is dead, I said, and the charity case never really existed. I think I'll just be Sarah for a while. Later that afternoon, I drove to the site where the man used to stand. The demolition crew had finished their work. The tall, imposing walls were gone. The mahogany floors were dust. In their place was a wide open field of green grass. Dozens of workers were busy planting trees, oak, maple, and cherry blossoms. In the center of the field, there was a playground. I saw children running and laughing. The first group of students from the Seed Project school. They didn't know the history of this land. They didn't know about the lies or the theft. To them, it was just a place to play. I saw a figure sitting on a bench near the new fountain. It was Chloe. She was wearing a simple uniform and was helping a little girl tie her shoe. When she saw me, she stood up. She didn't look for a way to insult me. She just gave me a small, sad smile. It looks better this way, Chloe said, gesturing to the park. It does, I agreed. How is the work going? It's hard, she admitted. I never realized how much I didn't know about the real world. But I think I'm learning. For the first time, I don't feel like I'm wearing a mask. That's a good start, I said. I handed her a small box. She opened it and gasped. Inside was a small piece of the blue porcelain from my mother's music box, set into a simple silver necklace. I had a jeweler smooth the edges, I explained. Consider it a reminder. You can't fix the past, but you can carry the lessons with you. Chloe touched the pendant, her eyes filling with tears. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. End quote. I left the park and went to the hospital one last time. Not for my mother. She was already home, resting in the garden. I went to the visitor's room of the county jail. Martha sat on the other side of the glass. She wasn't wearing silk. She was wearing a rough orange jumpsuit. Her hair hadn't been styled, and her face looked gray and tired. When she saw me, she didn't scream. She didn't call me names. She just looked at me with a hollow kind of wonder. You really did, she whispered into the phone. You took it all. I spent 10 years trying to turn you into nothing, and you ended up being the only one who survived. You didn't turn me into nothing, Martha, I said. You turned me into the person who was strong enough to stop you. You were my greatest teacher, in a way. You taught me exactly who I didn't want to be. Martha looked down at her hands. What happens now? Now, I live my life, I said. And you live with your memories. I hope they're worth the price you paid. I stood up and hung up the phone. As I walked out of the prison, I felt the sun on my face. It was a warm, golden afternoon. I got into my car and drove back to my house on the hill. My mother was waiting for me on the porch. She had a tray of tea and a book in her lap. She looked up and smiled, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The revenge wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the house. It was about the silence. I had spent a decade being silenced, and now my voice was the only one that mattered. I sat down next to my mother and took a sip of tea. Is it finished? She asked softly. I looked out over the city, at the parks, the schools, and the people living their lives. I thought about the girl in the attic and the woman standing here now. Yes, Mom, I said, leaning my head on her shoulder. It's finally finished. But as I closed my eyes, I felt the small key to the seed project vault in my pocket. I realized that while the revenge was over, the story was just beginning. Because the world is full of charity cases who are just waiting for their turn to be seen. And I was going to make sure every single one of them had a key.